Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So this past Thursday, Disney had their Investor Day event where they made so many announcements. It was crazy. I had anticipated a few announcements here and there, but they just turned it up straight to an 11 and they gave us so much news that it was honestly overwhelming to kind of take it all in as it was happening. But today I'm going to be giving you guys my thoughts on some of these announcements, and we're going to be diving into the Marvel announcements specifically for this video, and I am planning on doing at least one other video talking about the other announcements that they made for the other sections of their studios. But for today we're going to be diving into the Marvel ones. Now I don't know if you already know this, but your girl is a Marvel fan. Okay, your girl is a Marvel stan, and that day when they announced all of those new projects coming down the pipeline from Marvel Studios was one of the best days ever. Truly one of the best days of 2020, because we've been starved for content. Us Marvel fans have just been shriveling away without our Marvel content. But the fact that Disney has just thrown all of this out there and said this is what is coming up for the next few years on Disney Plus, I'm ecstatic. I'm ecstatic. So we're going to be diving into the trailers, to the other announcements, just all of my thoughts on that. But before we do dive into that, just a friendly little reminder that if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Without further ado, let's get into it. First of all, let's get into the trailers. Now, Marvel released 4 trailers for their upcoming Disney Plus shows, and I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on each of them in order of the one that I like the most to the one that I like the least. And that is, of course, in reference to the trailer, not the show itself, because we haven't seen what the show looks like. First of all, the trailer that I absolutely loved, I think this knocked it out of the park, truly, and that was for Loki. The Loki trailer. Listen, Loki is a legendary MCU character. Loki is a character that absolutely carried Thor: The Dark World. He absolutely carried a lot of the Thor franchise just in general. His dynamic with Thor is excellent. You know, the way that Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston play that part, that brotherly relationship that they have, it's just brilliant. So I think he's more than deserving of a Disney Plus show of his own. I was interested in the show prior to this trailer, but I didn't think that I would be as excited as I ended up being watching the trailer itself, because it is so cool. I have no idea what's going on. Absolutely no idea what's going on. It looks so weird. It looks crazy. It's giving me very, you know, Umbrella Academy vibes, which is interesting, especially with the TVA. So I'm hoping that it's going to be some way to kind of differentiate the two, especially considering how popular the Umbrella Academy is as well. But I think of all of the MCU characters that can kind of deliver on that vibe, it would definitely be Loki. I love the way that they have incorporated real life historical events like the presence of DB Cooper seemingly into this series to kind of suggest Loki's impact on real life historical events. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm really excited. I think Tom Hiddleston looks absolutely amazing, just as great as he was as Loki in the 2012 Avengers film. And I'm also very much looking forward to seeing what the rest of the cast has to offer. We have Owen Wilson, who looks great in that light grey hair. We have Gugu and Mbatha Raw, who's in the MCU now. Like, oh, I just love the cast. I love the premise of this series, and I think the trailer was cut very, very well with excellent music. The music makes such a difference to a trailer, and we'll talk about that more when I talk about some of the other trailers, but I think it really did help the Loki trailer just really stand out from the crowd. My second favorite trailer would be for WandaVision. Now, I've already talked at length about my thoughts on Wanda and Vision's relationship. I personally don't think that the previous films have done a good enough job of establishing their relationship. I think it's been quite rushed, and the meat of their story has taken place off screen seemingly. I mean, in Avengers Infinity War, we see them hanging out in Edinburgh, but we don't really get much of a further exploration of that relationship and how it grew. So I'm less convinced by this whole scenario that she has created in her mind to kind of cope with the fact that Vision is no longer actually there. I'm less convinced by it because I'm not as convinced by their love story in general. But still, having to, you know, put that aside for a second because what's done is done and we're here now, I will say that this series looks really interesting. It looks really weird. I mean, I'm sure that's something that has kind of come up in the narrative a lot, is that it's crazy, it's weird, it's something that the MCU hasn't done before. And I think because of just how huge the MCU is, variance is key. Well, speaking of variance, variance is key because we need to keep things from becoming too monotonous here. There are so many projects that are in the pipeline right now that the way that they're going to be able to differentiate themselves is if they create a niche to exist in this huge universe, this huge multiverse even. And I think WandaVision is a perfect example of a series that is eager to stand out from the crowd and be completely different, completely weird, so that these projects don't become too monotonous in the MCU, either on the big screen or the small one. In terms of the trailer specifically, I will say that I did notice that the interior scenes where they're kind of in that, you know, regular 1950s set looks far better than the exterior ones where they seem to be outside. I don't know if they're actually outside or if it's just a neighborhood that was constructed on set, but it looks a bit weird. Like, it looks a little cheap in those sequences. I think the sequence where Wanda seems to be flying in like yoga pants seems a little cheap to me. So I don't know about those outside sequences, but I think inside, when they're playing up the kind of 1950s, 1960s sitcom, is really interesting, and I think that looks best. But right now I'm not as convinced about the outside scenes, although I'm super excited to see what they do with the character of Monica Rambeau. She looks absolutely amazing. Her hair looked great, her eyeshadow looked very similar to mine. So I'm super excited to see what they do with her character, and of course she will be showing up in Captain Marvel 2, as was also announced, so we're going to have a continuation of her story in that film as well. Next up at number 3, we have Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, funnily enough, this is actually the series that I'm most looking forward to, because I love the Captain America side of the MCU. I think it's so cool. I think especially after Captain America the Winter Soldier, they reinvigorated that character and created such a cool little corner in this universe for him, with his side characters being so cool, so charismatic, largely wasted. Largely wasted because, of course, the Civil War film was kind of this huge, you know, Avengers 2.5 film. So the Captain America side characters didn't really get as much of a spotlight as they deserved to. I still think that their charisma shone through, and I think that's largely why Bucky and Sam have been given this series, because they just deserve more. They have such great on-screen chemistry with their frenemy dynamic, and I love the fact that this is becoming a series. We're also getting all sorts of tie-ins with the Black Widow film. Apparently there's going to be the appearance of Yelena, played by Florence Pugh, which is going to be really interesting. We also have the return of some characters like Zemo and Sharon Carter, who I don't care about. But this sounds like it's going to be a really fun series. I'm just excited to see the dynamic, the frenemy dynamic, which I love, between Bucky and Sam. That's literally, everything else is just decoration or ornamental, but that central focus of that dynamic is what is making me so excited for this series. I will say that I have listed this trailer as my third favorite, and that's mostly because the trailer itself wasn't cut very well. It didn't scream dynamic, it didn't scream exciting to me. It was kind of just like a bog standard action property trailer. It didn't really have enough, you know, great shots to kind of make it stand out from the crowd. I think the best sequence in the trailer was definitely the Sam Wilson flight sequence, where you're kind of flying with him. That was pretty cool, and I think to emphasize that in the trailer is also a great choice, because it really emphasizes his unique selling point as a character, is the fact that he can fly, and the fact that he looks so cool doing it, and the fact that it also makes him quite different to the original, you know, Steve Rogers Captain America. So I liked them highlighting that, but other than that, not much was in the trailer to really get me that excited. And also, speaking of music, as I did before, I think the trailer music here just was lackluster. It was very generic, very generic. I need a score that's just a bit more exciting and a bit more distinct and unique to really make this property stand out, because otherwise it will just come across as yet another action series that doesn't really scream, you know, special and, you know, worthy of the big screen in a way that a lot of these other MCU series kind of are. So next up at number 4, we have the What If trailer. Now, I'm super excited for this series as well, because we're diving into like a multiverse here. We're diving into different possibilities, the endless possibilities of what could have happened to these characters if certain situations had changed. Just the smallest change can make the ultimate change to a character's path, and I think that whole concept is really interesting, really fascinating to me, and I'm excited to see what they do with it. In an ideal world, this would have been live action. I know that's like near impossible. That would be so expensive, and also the actors and the technicalities of that would just be impossible. So making it animated is so much easier, and you can have several seasons pretty easily because it's animated and you don't rely on the real actors. But in my dream world, this would be live action, and you would recreate different versions of each of the film. Like that's what's going on up here, right? It's not going to happen in real life, but still, I think the animation looks really cool. It's not my favorite style of animation, if I'm being honest, but I do think that it looks pretty cool and pretty distinct, which is something that I do look for in animation. And Also, Jeffrey Wright's voice acting in this trailer alone, I was very intrigued. I was like, who is the voice actor for the Watcher? Because he seems like it was such a great quality to it. That gravitas that he had in his voice was such a great quality, and it also seemed like an all-knowing character. Like, the vocal choice was excellent in my opinion. Like, it's such a small detail, but I really was sold on it. I also liked the Yondu voice. I don't know if it was actually Michael Rooker who came back and recorded those lines. It sounds like him. If it isn't, I think the voice actor did a really good job of mimicking him, because he sounds pretty spot on. But I'm pretty sure it is actually Michael Rooker. I know they actually have some of the live action actors working on this series. I think they also have Hayley Atwell as Peggy here, voicing that role. And of course you do have technically the final performance of Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther, as T'Challa in this series. And here it's really interesting. He seems to actually be playing the role of Star-Lord. So in this version of events, something happens where he ends up being taken by the aliens and he ends up essentially being Star-Lord. And I'm really interested to see what they're going to do with that turn of events and that version of history. This whole concept is just fascinating to me, because it's as if, you know, Marvel has spent over a decade laying down the groundwork for this huge universe, and you know, these characters have become iconic. These storylines have drawn in millions of people around the world and been so successful, and now they're just getting to play around with the world that they have created, the universe that they have created. And I think this show is a perfect example of them just kind of playing around with the toys that they already have and having fun with it. Now let's get into some of the other announcements that Kevin Feige made for Marvel. And first off, we have these kind of Guardians of the Galaxy Disney Plus projects. So we have the I Am Groot animated series that is about baby Groot, I believe. And we also have the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special, which is genius, absolutely genius. Like, that makes perfect sense to me. I can't wait to see what that looks like. And according to, you know, what I've been seeing, apparently this is just going to be filmed alongside Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and it's going to be released prior to that film's release as a kind of prequel to that film, which I think is a very clever way of doing it. It's kind of like a two birds one stone situation, and it means that we do get the actual cast in this live action project. So I'm super excited to see what they do with that. It's just going to be, you know, it's going to be hilarious with James Gunn's humor and of course the brilliance of that cast. I can't wait to see what they do with that. Next we have the kind of Iron Man Disney Plus project. So we have Armor Wars, which is centered around Don Cheadle's War Machine. I don't know much about that project. I don't know why this project exists. If I'm being honest, War Machine has never been my favorite character, but we'll see what they do with this one. I literally don't know what more to say on that front, but that's happening, so there you go. And then we also have the Ironheart series. Now this is interesting because I don't read the comics. I'm not that familiar with the character of Ironheart / Riri Williams, who was kind of this black female younger replacement for Tony Stark. That is a tricky situation. That is a very tricky situation. Even as someone who doesn't read the comics, I know that she's quite an unpopular character because of that replacement. People were quite angry with the fact that Marvel just replaced a bunch of their legacy characters with these kind of woke versions of them, and there's all sorts of discourse in comics and in all mediums about, you know, how to tackle representation properly, and many people feel that replacing these traditionally white characters and just kind of race bending them and gender bending them, or both, is not the way. And Riri Williams is a perfect example of, I think, the worst case scenario for that. So I'm really interested to see what people's reaction will be for this series. I, for one, am excited because Iron Man is dead in the MCU, so we can kind of branch out and do other Iron Man situations, but also because this is like an MCU series that is centered around a black female character, so of course I'm excited. Of course I'm excited. Like, my loyalty to Tony Stark's Iron Man isn't strong enough for me to just rebel against this for no reason. I'm excited to see what they do with this character. And you know, her lack of popularity in the comics doesn't have to be reflected in the show itself. She could end up being a really great on-screen character in her own right, and I really hope that that is the case. Although some of the language that Kevin Feige used in terms of, you know, her being this, like, you know, great scientist who's even better than Tony Stark, and I don't know how I feel about that, because I always cringe when they do that. They're like, this woman is even better than the original male character. People will always have a kind of visceral reaction to that. So I think what's most important is that they just create a really likable, personable, well-rounded character who can stand on her own 2 feet, even if she does exist in the Iron Man corner of the MCU. Next up, we have Miss Marvel. Now, we saw a sizzle reel for Miss Marvel being presented here during the Investor Day event. We didn't really see much else. Now, this series, unfortunately, even though it's only just started to film, has already become surrounded by quite a bit of controversy on so many different levels. There was a whole Fix Miss Marvel hashtag going around on Twitter, and there was some disturbing allegations made about some of the cast members of this series, which is very unfortunate. So I think that kind of tempered the excitement for the show in general a little bit. But I will say, aside from those real life controversies that seem to be surrounding the series, I do think that it's not really a show that's made for me as an audience member, and that is perfectly fine. Like, that is literally perfectly fine. It looks like this series skews a bit younger. It's giving me very Disney Channel vibes, and I'm okay with that because I'm okay with the MCU being diverse in terms of its, you know, age demographic. I'm perfectly fine with this series skewing a little bit younger and focusing on the younger demographic and trying to attract, you know, kids and preteens and even teens. I think that's perfectly fine. Like, not everything has to be directed towards the 18 to 24 demographic. But as someone who does fall in that age gap, it does mean that I'm less excited for the show, and I'm keeping an eye on the whole controversies surrounding this series as well, because that really doesn't look good. I want this to do well. I really want this to do well. Although in general, Miss Marvel as a superhero isn't my favorite. I don't like her superhero powers. I was watching my brother play the game, the beta for the Avengers game, and I'm really not a fan of her, like, big hands. I think it looks ridiculous. Like, I think it's crazy. It's a crazy power set, so I don't know how they're gonna translate that to the small screen. As a character, I think Kamala Khan looks really interesting, and the fact that she is this Asian, or more specifically Pakistani hero in the Marvel catalogue is such a huge deal. I mean, it's a great way to bring about representation for this world, but I think her power set is a bit odd. Next up, we had She-Hulk. Now, the Hulk verse of the MCU, I mean, there's not really much of a Hulk verse because Hulk is apparently still owned by Paramount, but it's not an area of the MCU that I'm particularly interested in, if I'm being honest. I don't care about the Hulk as a character. He's never been my favorite. I, for one, have never really missed the standalone Hulk film in a way that some people may have. I think Mark Ruffalo works best when he's kind of enveloped into someone else's story in the way that he was in Thor Ragnarok. I think that pairing was just brilliant. It was just enough Hulk, but not too much where I'm just sitting there thinking, like, he's just destroying, he's smashing everything. What else is there, you know? So I like the fact that they've incorporated him into other stories. But here we have the case of She-Hulk, who I know even less about because I don't read the comics, but Tatiana Maslany is going to do a great job with this role. I'm so interested to see what she's going to look like covered in green and like hulked up. Like, is she going to be wearing a suit, or is it going to be CG? Like, are they going to make her look more Hulk-like using CG? Is my question. Okay. And also they're incorporating some like legal aspects because she's a lawyer, which is going to be fun for me. So I'm interested in this show. I'm 100% going to watch it. Apparently they also are going to be bringing back Tim Roth's Abomination, who I care about even less than the regular Hulk. I don't care about the Hulkverse, but fine. We'll see how this goes. Next up, we also got the confirmation of Hailee Steinfeld in the Hawkeye series. Now, she's going to be portraying Kate Bishop, and I don't know much about this character. She seems to be like a mini Hawkeye, but that looks really exciting. I already saw some of these set photos that they've released, or rather were leaked last week, and I think she looks pretty cool. I think her costume looks kind of bog standard. I really hope that that's not her final costume. I really hope that that's just something that she wears to train, or something that she just starts off with before some Avengers money comes along and sponsors a better costume. I wasn't the biggest fan of the first kind of draft of the situation, but we'll see what she ends up looking like on the show. I do think she makes for a perfect Kate Bishop though. Perfect casting. I know she was like fan casted for a long time, and the fact that she's actually going to be on the show is getting a lot of people very excited, and I'm excited to see what she does with this character. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward forward to seeing what they do with the Hawkeye series. He's kind of like an underrated Avengers character. I mean, if you think about it, he's the only character that hasn't been given a movie at this point, because even Black Widow is getting one. But he's getting a series on Disney Plus, and hopefully they'll be able to delve into that character with a little bit more depth, as well as introducing some fun new characters for his corner of the MCU. And hopefully it'll be a good show. So far we haven't really seen much from it, but hopefully it'll look good. We also have Moonlight, which, not much was really revealed about this show at all, other than its existence and, the fact that it's coming along in the pipeline. There wasn't any confirmation for who's going to be playing Moonlight himself. A lot of people speculated that it would be Oscar Isaac, but he's recently joined some other project with Sony for some like Steel Man thing. I have no idea what's going on there. But it looks unlikely that he will also be joining as Moonlight, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes as well. I don't know much about this character as well, so I'm just going to move swiftly along to the Secret Invasion series. The Secret Invasion series. I don't know what's going on there. I have no idea what's going on there. So Samuel L. Jackson is going to be starring along with Ben Mendelsohn's character from the Captain Marvel movie. And there's going to be a whole kind of setting up of the Secret Invasion storyline, which I presume will be the storyline that will be explored in phase like 5? I think after we've done the whole Scarlet Witch storyline with Doctor Strange ending that storyline in 2022, we're going to be moving on to Secret Invasion. This series looks weird. I don't know. We'll see how it ends up being, but I feel like this is kind of a superfluous one at this point in time. But maybe it'll really help to set up the Secret Invasion and set up the idea that no one can be trusted, because anyone could be a Skrull. Anyone could be taken over by a Skrull, and so that whole idea could create a little bit of intrigue, a little bit of espionage, and that might be the theme of that series before heading into the films to dive into that storyline further. So we'll see what they do with that one. And finally, we have the movies. Now, at this point in time, Marvel did not announce that they are going to be releasing these films straight to Disney Plus. They are planned and scheduled to have a theatrical release still. So that's really interesting, especially considering that huge announcement that Warner Brothers made last week, where they said that they're going to be sending their 2021 slate of films straight to their HBO Max platform, as well as with a simultaneous theatrical release. Disney made no such announcement on Thursday, which we'll be diving into in my next video further, but that does mean that so far the Marvel films are planned to have a theatrical release as they were beforehand. So if all goes to plan, next year we're going to be seeing the release of Black Widow, this highly anticipated film. Listen, I'm sure someone cares about Black Widow. I'm sure Scarlett Johansson cares about Black Widow. I personally feel like, as many people do, that this film is several years too late, and I think this is one of the few missteps that Kevin Feige has made when forming this empire, is just ignoring Black Widow for far too long, and unfortunately giving her a film that is released after the death of the character in the series. It just doesn't have that same excitement factor. It doesn't have that same urgency to it. So I personally wouldn't even be too shocked if they ended up just dropping this on Disney Plus with maybe a small additional charge or additional fee, because at this point in time I don't think it's the hot ticket that it should have been had it been released several years earlier. We also got the announcement of Fantastic Four and the fact that it's going to be directed by Spider-Man Homecoming's John Watts. Now, he also directed the sequel, I believe, Far From Home as well. I enjoy the Spider-Man films quite a bit. I like Tom Holland's Spider-Man a lot, but I will say that as much as people were excited about the announcement of Fantastic Four coming, I didn't see a lot of people being excited that John Watts specifically is going to be directing it. I would say that, speaking of fan casting, I would say that Brad Bird directing a live action Fantastic Four film would have been chef's kiss, genius, perfection, truly. Now, yes, you could say that Brad Bird in live action films is a bit wobbly, okay? He did do Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, I believe, which is one of my if not my very favorite Mission Impossible film, but he also did Tomorrowland, which was unfortunate, okay? But hear me out, okay? Incredibles, The Incredibles. We need to have faith. The man did The Incredibles. I choose to still have faith. I choose to still believe that Brad Bird would be an excellent Fantastic Four director, and I think it's a shame that they haven't gone down that route. But sure, let's get John Watts in here to kind of work his John Watts magic and make a serviceable Fantastic Four film. I think that's what it's going to end up being, like, serviceable. But we'll see. This is very early days and dependent on the casting, because here's the thing, I strongly believe that John Watts's films are largely driven by the excellent casting choices. I mean, you have Tom Holland as Spider-Man, you have Jake Gyllenhaal in the last film, he was just phenomenal. You have Zendaya. Like, I think his films are supported by great casts, but we'll see what he can do with the Fantastic Four. I personally am not the most invested in Fantastic Four because I've never really loved them as a superhero family. I'm certainly open to that changing with John Watts at the helm. We'll see what he can do with this property. Surely Kevin Feige is not going to let this man fail with one of the most prized possessions of that Disney Fox acquisition. We also got the bittersweet and tragic confirmation that they are not planning on recasting T'Challa for Black Panther 2 after the tragic death of the real life actor Chadwick Boseman. Now, I personally am 100% for this decision. I believe that recasting this character for the sequel of his film would be really disrespectful. I think it would just be dismissive of his death. I'm personally, vehemently against that idea. But I understand a lot of people think that he should have been recast because they don't want to see the character of T'Challa leave the MCU because of the actor's death. They believe that his legacy should continue in the MCU and he should be recast so that the story of T'Challa can continue on. I personally think that, within a few years, we're going to have a reboot of all of these franchises. Give it a decade. Like, they literally won't be able to resist. Give it a decade. We'll see a reboot of everyone, including Black Panther, 100%. And that is where you're going to get your new Black Panther or your new T'Challa specifically. But I think in terms of a sequel within the same franchise, there's no way that they can just replace this character like they did with, Don Cheadle. They can't do that because this character just has a completely different meaning. It's a completely different level. We've never really seen something like this. It would be like if they recast Heath Ledger's Joker for Dark Knight Rises in the way that Christopher Nolan was intending on having the Joker appear in that film. It would be like if it was recast then. People would be really upset by that, and understandably so. This is not the same as, the Joker being portrayed by Jared Leto later on in a completely different franchise, because that would be the same franchise. That would be literally a sequel to the same film. So I personally am for this decision. I think it is the most respectful way to go forward. At the end of the day, these are just comic book movies, and to just take a moment to consider the real life contribution of this real life person, I think would be beneficial. And again, in a few years, they're going to reboot everything. Like, they're going to have new Iron Men, new Captain Americas, new Thors, and eventually a new Black Panther that people can really get behind. And now to run through some of the other movie releases that we're going to be getting and, the announcements surrounding this. There wasn't any real news surrounding these other films other than a confirmation that we are going to be seeing Christian Bale portray the character of Gore, is his name? Gore, and he's like a god eater or god killer. No idea who this character is, but Christian Bale in a Thor film, I am so excited. I am a little bit hesitant or a little bit worried about just how congested this film is becoming, because of course we're also going to be getting Lady Thor portrayed by Natalie Portman. She's going to be going through the cancer storyline where Jane Foster is supposed to develop cancer, and when she becomes Thor, then that gives her the kind of reprieve from cancer. So that's a really interesting storyline that I've been hearing about, that I hope they do justice here. But it seems as though there's going to be a lot happening. Apparently, Star-Lord and the Guardians of the Galaxy are also appearing in this film, and we also have Thor, of course, himself. So it seems as though it's going to be quite crowded, but a lot of these Phase 4, Phase 5 films seem as though they're going to be crowded because now we're no longer doing just singular standalone films anymore. The world is becoming more and more intertwined than it ever has been, and it kind of makes sense, and I think that is the logical way forward, because how can you go back to single standalone films after Avengers Endgame. But at the same time, it does mean that these stories are going to have to adapt to the fact that they're no longer just going to be about one singular franchise. Also have Shang-Chi, which I know absolutely nothing about, but I'm excited for that one. And swiftly moving on, we also have Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. This is the third Ant-Man film. It will also be directed by Peyton Reed, who I think is one of the most bland MCU directors. I can't believe that he's been given yet another film. I just think of, you know, how Edgar Wright would have treated this franchise, and I think it would have just been so much more distinctive. It would have had a bit more of that sauce, that Edgar Wright sauce. Right now, the Ant-Man franchise is without a doubt one of the most bland areas of the MCU, but we'll see what he does with this third film. I kind of have a feeling that I already know what this third film is going to look like, pretty much the same as the other two. I am excited to see Jonathan Majors added to the cast. I hope he's not wasted. The MCU sometimes does this. It sometimes wastes excellent actors, and I hope that's not the case for Jonathan Majors, because he is phenomenal. You know, after Lovecraft Country, he's definitely on a roll right now, and I hope they keep it up with Ant-Man. I wouldn't have attached him to the Ant-Man franchise personally, but I hope he does something with the role of Kang the Conqueror, I believe it is. No idea what that means. No idea what the words that just came out of my mouth means, but hopefully he does a great job with this role. I'm excited to see him in the MCU. And lastly, we did have the confirmation that Tiana Paris's Monica Rambeau and Iman Vellani's Miss Marvel, or Kamala Khan, are going to be making an appearance in Captain Marvel 2. And Captain Marvel 2 is set to be directed by Nia DaCosta, who is officially the first black female director to be working on an MCU film, which I'm super excited about. I'm super excited to see what she does with this franchise, because unfortunately the first Captain Marvel film was just so freaking bland. It was so bland, it was so meh, it was so middle of the road. I recently rewatched it and I was like, god damn, like this isn't even as good as I remembered it. Like, it was quite boring. It was nothing really distinctive about it in terms of the flavor that the directors could inject into it. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what Nia DaCosta does, because I truly think the other directors that had it beforehand, just, they weren't cutting it truly. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Nia DaCosta can do with this character, because I think Brie Larson has the potential to be a great Captain Marvel. She just needs an injection of some new energy, some new vibes in there to really make her stand out, because Marvel has some pretty iconic superhero and villain characters, and Captain Marvel gave us none of that. None of that whatsoever. So that's it from me. Those are my thoughts on all of the Marvel Studios announcements that were made by Kevin Feige during Disney's Investor Day. Let me know what you guys thought of these announcements down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you can be told when I upload next. I will be uploading another video talking about the other announcements made during this Disney Investor Day event, so stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.